Good afternoon, everybody. Dave Robbins with Endtime Ministries. Thank you so much for joining me on this edition of the Endtime Show. You know, last Friday, obviously things got a little heated at the White House. Most of you have probably seen the video of the Oval Office meeting where President Trump and Vice President Vance sat down with Ukraine's President Zelensky during the meeting in the Oval Office. And, you know, the meeting basically called to finalize not only the minerals deal, but to cement a peace process between Ukraine and Russia. That's what President Trump was trying to do. And Zelensky, I think it was our Secretary of Treasury, Bissett, he said that Zelensky had this was his third chance to sign the mineral deal, and that he hadn't done it yet. Bissett had went over there to Ukraine to try to get it signed, and Zelensky argued. He said we went about 45 minutes back and forth arguing and loud voices. And Zelensky said, I don't want to sign it here. And so he said, well, what do you want me to go out and tell the press? Because the world is going to be wanting to know what happened, and I don't want Russia to think there's any light between Ukraine and the United States. And he said, just tell them I'll sign it at the Munich Security Conference. Well, they went to and that's what Bissett did. Well, they went to the Munich Security Conference. At the Munich Security Conference, he met Rubio, Secretary of State Rubio, and Vice President Vance. That's when J.D. Vance gave that speech at the Munich Security Conference where he fired off on Russia and their demonizing freedom of speech and things like that. Well, when they got there, Zelensky met Vance and Rubio instead of somebody like, then they were a whole different ball game that he'd been dealing with rather than somebody like a Kamala Harris and, and a Blinken or Biden's Secretary of State. And so he didn't sign it there. He said, no, I want to go to Washington to sign the minerals deal. So that's the second time he said he didn't want to sign it. Well, when they got to Washington, they were wanting to sign the security agreement, talk about peace, and that's when Zelensky went into the Oval Office, and all of these guys knew the back history of what brought them to the Oval Office. So when President Trump, for like, 35, 40 minutes, everything was pretty cool, wasn't it? And then when President Trump started talking about, the peace and different things he wanted to do and the minerals deal, Zelensky started saying, no, I need security agreements and this, that, and the other, and just very kind of belligerent. And that's when, because Vice President J.D. Vance knew what was going on, he had seen President Zelensky rolling his eyes, throwing his hands up, shrugging his shoulders for 35 or 40 minutes. When he started being very disrespectful to President Trump in front of the media in the Oval Office, that's when Vice President J.D. Vance come to him and said, hey, we're trying to keep your country from being destroyed. We're looking at diplomacy. We're looking at peace. And Zelensky became belligerent. They all started going back and forth, and it all kind of went south, didn't it? But they understood. A lot of people on some of the left news sources, they're not telling you about all the backstory of all of this. Well, so in this meeting, they were there to not only sign a minerals deal, but to cement a peace process between Ukraine and Russia. That's what President Trump wanted. Well, Zelensky, on the other hand, he was there to pushing for more U.S. aid as his country battles Russia, right? But President Trump and Vice President Vance, they were all about cooling things down with some diplomacy and a ceasefire. Well, things heated up, obviously, when Zelensky pushed back at that, and Vance wasn't going to have any of it, and he called him out for being disrespectful and airing it all out in front of the press. Well, then when Vice President J.D. Vance did that, oh man, that set a torch under President Trump. He jumps in and he says to Zelensky, hey, you've got no room to talk tough, especially after all the support that we've sent your way. And President Trump even warned him, hey, you're playing with a very risky game here. You don't have the cards. You're putting World War III on the line. And in the end, President Trump, you guys know, he showed him the door and later hit up Truth Social saying that Zelensky's not welcome back until he's ready for peace talks. And it was quite the showdown, wasn't it? Well, following the meeting, European leaders, they rallied behind Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. And in response, leaders from Germany, France, Spain, Poland, the Netherlands, and others, alongside Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, they publicly expressed solidarity with Ukraine. Now, you understand, I'm going to get to the NATO situation here and what all is going on, but you understand, without the United States, there is no NATO. What those nations should have did is said, hey, Zelensky, you're going to have to get your affairs in order. You're not going to be president very long if you don't straighten up and get on board with the plan here, because without the United States, there's no NATO. But they supported Zelensky. And key figures like French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, they emphasized Russia as the aggressor and Ukraine's right to support, while EU leaders Antonio Costa and Ursula von der Leyen, they assured Zelensky of continued backing for a just and lasting peace. Well, yesterday, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, he hosted a summit in London with Ukrainian Volodymyr Zelensky and European leaders, and they announced a framework for a peace plan to support Ukraine following Zelensky's the contentious visit that happened here in the Oval Office on Friday. That plan, now listen to this. You think some of these people aren't warmongers. Rather than talk peace, I would have said, hey, no options on the table. We got to talk peace with Russia. They're not doing that. The plan includes sustained aid to Ukraine, economic pressure on Russia. Think about that. Russia's sitting there with more nuclear weapons than the United States. They're going to put economic pressure on Russia? What happens when you back a rat into the corner, right? It comes out. When you pressure something, pressure cracks things. So when you back something into a corner, that's when it'll do things that normally wouldn't do. And they said we want to put economic pressure on Russia and a coalition of the willing to militarily deter future Russian aggression. Now, they have this meeting after what President Trump, who is by far, I think we're like 70 or 75% of the NATO bill funding, and yet they're saying, hey, we need to have a coalition of the willing to militarily deter future Russia aggression, with the UK prepared to contribute troops and air support. That's crazy. Without the United States, there is no NATO, folks. And this episode, of course, it's heightened concerns about a transatlantic unity as European leaders brace for potential shifts in U.S. policy toward Ukraine. That's very dangerous for Ukraine. So I'm going to get off a little deeper into the woods here, but my question to you is, how does all this end? That's where we're at. We could go down every rabbit trail and try to figure out the answer to every question. Probably impossible. But how does this all end? Well, guess what? The Bible has the answers to it. And so we're going to get into the Bible here in just a moment, talk prophecy. We're going to talk NATO, and I'm going to give you some history. We're going to have to do a lot of things before the end of the program. But first, let me mention a prophecy conference that I'm going to be out here, not this coming weekend, but the following weekend in Las Vegas, Nevada. I'll be at the Gospel Lighthouse Church, 6050 South Pecos Road, there in Las Vegas. And Saturday, March 15th at 6 p.m., I'll be teaching our new America's Prophesied Future lesson. And then Sunday morning, March 16 at 10 a.m., I'll be doing the Breaking Prophecy News. We'll have the Q&A session. First time we ever been to this church. It's going to be awesome. Look forward to meeting you out there. All the information is at our website, endtime.com. Go there and check it out. Look at the events tab under conferences. Everything's there, the information to get you out to the conference. And then, of course, let me mention Birch Gold, and then we'll get into the lesson today. You know, we've been holding our breath for months, right? all of America just about, and much of the world. But it's like we can finally exhale. Man, the shackles have been taken off, and America's taken off like a rocket ship. And we can finally get to work on some of the major issues that our country is facing. One of the most significant certainly is our national debt. I think it's $36.5 trillion now. And the fact is, our nation's broke, and it's certainly a huge issue that even President Trump and Doge and everybody else working together, certainly it cannot be quickly dismantled. So the strategy is the same. You got to diversify your savings. That's why we recommend birchgold.com/endtime. Many things are out of America's control, period, even the president's. And it's important to protect what you can, especially your savings. Birch Gold Group can help you convert an IRA or a 401k into an IRA in physical gold. Best news, it doesn't cost you a penny out of pocket. Central banks are buying up gold like there's no tomorrow, folks. So protect your savings with Birch Gold. Visit birchgold.com/endtime. All right, so let's do a deep dive into some history and prophecy to see what the Bible says about all this, right? Because I talked to you earlier, I mentioned the eagle, the bear, and the 10-horned beast. All of them are involved in this, right? This is a 2,500-year-old prophecy, everybody. So let's talk about it. You know, today, Russia claims that Ukraine's potential NATO membership gave them a legitimate reason to invade, and that still fuels the heated debate over who really is at fault here. And you understand, NATO was, after World War II, NATO was created to stop Russia from further encroaching into Europe. And so, back when he was in charge, Joe Biden kept calling Russia's actions unprovoked here. And Russia was saying, hey, you cannot let NATO come into Ukraine, period. That's a red line for us. And yet, all of this, much of this, most recent stuff happened under the Biden administration. They kept calling Russia's actions unprovoked. You were unprovoked, and yet you invaded Ukraine. Well, that's the line I want to go down today. And you probably heard this line parroted nonstop on the Western media since the war kicked off back in February of 2022. But Russia's got a different story. And you say, Dave, are you a Russia supporter? No, not. Are you a Ukraine supporter? Not necessarily. I'm like President Trump. I want peace. They're at war. People are dying, old men, young men. I want that to stop. So, Russia says that Ukraine cozying up to NATO, that threatens their security and goes against promises that Western leaders made right after the Soviet Union collapsed. This was in the early 90s. And Putin's has been vocal about this, and he says that back in the early 90s, the West swore that NATO wouldn't budge 1 inch eastward if Germany could reunite under the alliance. So basically you had Germany was divided with the Berlin Wall. They looked at Russia and said, hey, if you guys will, tear down the Berlin Wall, allow the two Germanys to reunite, and pull your troops out, then we won't move 1 inch to the east towards Russia. And Russia did that. The two Germanys reunited, and now you have modern day Europe. The problem is that we will not move 1 inch eastward. That's been thrown in the trash can years ago, right? Now here we are with President Trump seemingly nodding along to take that. And just a couple of months ago, on January 7, President Trump said at a press conference, a big part of this mess is that Russia, for decades, way before Putin, was dead set against Ukraine joining NATO. They've been crystal clear about that. He said it's like it's carved in stone. And then President Trump said, then Biden comes along and says, nah, Ukraine, you should get into NATO. Well, that puts NATO right on Russia's doorstep. And President Trump said, I can see where they'd feel some kind of way about that, right? And so now if you dig into the declassified files that are sitting at the National Security Archive in George Washington University, it looks like Russia might actually be onto something. So here's the gist from a summary, and I'm quoting here. On February 9th, 1990, U.S. Secretary of State James Baker gave Gorbachev the famous 1-inch eastward promise about NATO's growth. And it wasn't just a one-off either. It was part of a whole string of assurances from Western leaders to Mikhail Gorbachev and other Soviet officials about keeping the USSR secure during Germany's unification in 1991. And we've got declassified papers from the U.S., the Soviet Union, Germany, Britain, France, backing this up, that we will not move 1 inch towards Russia from Germany. Think about this. Those same records show U.S. officials telling Gorbachev that whatever European security setup came next would also include Russia, not box it out. And that lines up with what Vladimir Putin told Tucker Carlson in that the Wild Moscow interview that happened, what was it, maybe 10, 11, maybe a year ago. 10, 11 months, maybe a year ago. Plus, British officials agreed that Russia should have gotten a solid guarantee that Poland would not jump into NATO as well. Well, guess what? Poland joined back in 1999, along with a bunch of other Central and Eastern Europe countries later on. As of today, think about this. NATO has 32 members. 16 of them signed up after the Cold War ended, and some are way past Germany's midpoint. So think, if you're Russia, what would you do? Now, again, I don't agree with Vladimir Putin and Russia and his ideologies and communism and all that other stuff. And if you think communism's dead, think again. But imagine what you would do if the victor nations of World War II said, hey, we're not going, and especially the ones in power in Germany or in Middle Europe there, they said, hey, you guys pull your troops back, allow Germany to reunite here, and we won't come 1 inch eastward. Now, there have been 16 more members signed up since then. And so you say, well, hey, that lets Russia off the hook. They should have invaded. Well, not completely. Because if you look at it purely from a fairness angle, any country should be free to team up with whoever they want without getting invaded, right? But that's a nice idea in this messy world that doesn't really play by those rules. And you're talking about politics, you're talking about, it's a dog-eat-dog world out there, folks. And so I don't really necessarily all the way agree with Ukraine. I don't necessarily all the way agree with Russia either, because I don't want to see innocent people die in Ukraine. So I'm not necessarily, a warmonger saying, yeehaw, let's go to war, Russia. But so it's a mess, right? Well, unlike Biden and Europe's war-hungry leaders, President Trump's pushing to stop the bloodshed and keep us from stumbling into a nuclear disaster, because Russia and the United States control 90% of the nuclear arsenal on the planet. And Zelensky, I don't know what he's doing wanting to keep this war going. It's crazy, unless he's just trying to get super rich, or because they're not going to defeat Russia. And so he keeps, President Trump keeps saying, listen, people are dying. You've heard it over and over and over again. And Biden's crew, though, they just shrugged off like Putin's nuclear warnings, like that it was all hot air. But last month, on February 13th, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, he told NATO officials the plan is to negotiate a quick, peaceful end to this war that locks in real, lasting stability. Well, that's pretty much what they were talking to with Zelensky, and Zelensky was like, I need security guarantees. I need, this and that. He was making demands and rolling his eyes, shrugging his shoulders, just making it out like, President Trump and J.D. Vance, you guys are peons, and I can be belligerent if I want to, even if I'm in your Oval Office in front of the press. And, of course, you remember that didn't sit too well with them. So one more aspect is that the Council on Foreign Relations, it's part of the globalist cabal, the part of the deep state here in the United States. The globalist crowd finally admitted what a lot of us have known all along, that Russia is winning the war. Mainstream media wouldn't touch that one. And still, the Council on Foreign Relations, they're not waving a white flag. They're all about NATO countries doubling down on military teamwork and dragging this fight out until, as they put it, until Russia will see even ever fewer benefits to continuing the fight. So here's the thing. NATO ups the odds of America getting sucked into a war. Let me say that again, because I don't think a lot of people understand that. Our involvement into NATO at this point, it ups the odds of America getting sucked into a war with Russia. That's what Zelensky wanted. Zelensky said, I've got to have security agreements put in place that if Russia invades again, NATO, the United States, will go at Russia. If, and because of, I think it's Article 5, if one member of NATO gets into a scrap, then we're all in. Every single one of the 32 countries has to come to their aid. Without NATO, a fight might just stay local between the nations directly involved and whatever allies they picked up on their own. On top of that, NATO's handy excuse to pull everyone into some world system is really what's going on. Just recently, you guys might recognize a guy named Jeffrey Sachs. And he's a Columbia professor, a big shot in the European stabilization projects. He told Tucker Carlson, I would encourage you to go watch the interview, it's a good one, that the West's real game with NATO was total global control. Talking about a world government. Very prophetic. And I would love to see the United States pull out of NATO, because I don't want to get pulled into a war. If somebody, does some nonsense and Russia attacks, what if Ukraine was a NATO member? We would already be at war with Russia. Think about that. Article 5 says any nation that goes to war, the rest of them have to come to their protection. So, quite the conundrum, right? How does this all end? That's my question to you today. Because, there are timelines and different things showing how all this, was laid out, and that this NATO situation, it's quite the mess, to say the least. But the thing is, I think some people, when you start talking about all of this, their eyes kind of glaze over, like, wow, Dave, that's history, and whoo, you guys, you guys are trying to study it and figure everything out, but I just want to know how the thing ends. Are we going to war or aren't we? That's some people's question. Is Russia and Europe going to kill each other, and, how's it all going to end? Well, that's why I wanted to come at it from a prophetic perspective, because I don't have all the answers to that. President Trump doesn't have all the answers. The European leaders, Zelensky, Putin, nobody's got the answers to that. But guess what? The Bible does. Thank God for the prophecies of the Bible. Because if you think about it, the United States is going to pull out of Europe. The powers of the world governing body, we're going to swing from the United States over to Europe, and we're going to be disengaged from that in the end time. Think about the current scenario with Zelensky and Ukraine and Russia and the European Union, America, all of that. The eagle, the bear, Russia, the tin-horned beast, which is the current European Union. They're all involved in this mess right now. But none of them really know how it's going to end up. They're vying for the place at the table. Zelensky's trying to get money and weapons and security agreements rather than saying, let's just sign a peace agreement. Let's stop the thing. You don't want to do that. And, which is crazy in my opinion, but it is what it is. And President Trump actually told him, he told the press conference after the meeting with Zelensky, he said, look, he said he's either going to sign a peace deal with us or the United States is going to pull out and let them and Russia fight it out. Now think about that. What would you do if you were Zelensky? I would have said, look, let me see President Trump right now. I'm sorry. I love you guys, and I need you to help my country. I mean, I would have went in on bowed knee, but everybody championed him. Yes, he's a hero. He stood up to President Trump. That was not super smart, I'll be honest with you. And because your only way, basically, Marco Rubio said it, who else other than President Trump is going to get Ukraine out of this fix? It's not going to be Europe sending arms in there. That would be crazy. So the only guy that can get you out of the fray and you basically get kicked out of his house. And, you know, wow, I don't know. It's a mess. So how does it all end? That's what I'm going to focus the rest of the program on, is explaining to you. We're going to talk about the bear. We're going to talk about the 3 ribs in the bear's mouth. Could Ukraine be one of those 3 ribs? We're going to talk to you about America. We're going to talk to you about the 10-horn beast. We're going to see what the Bible says about this situation that's going on now and how the prophecies could potentially be fulfilled in some of this. So don't touch that dial, because we got a lot to go, and very prophetic, by the way. That's what we're interested in, the prophecies of the Bible.
The breaking news this hour: at least 22 people are reported to have died in a strike in Gaza.
The rise of Islam.
I'm trying to bring answers for so many families desperately.
Is the Israel-Hamas-Iran conflict World War III? So let's talk about the 4 horsemen. What do these horses symbolize? These are the 4 spirits of the heavens which go forth from standing before the Lord of all the earth. In the end time, the true people of God will not be weak, anemic, and defeated. These prophesied events are revealing we are quickly approaching the time of the Great Tribulation right now.
Now streaming on OneSource and available to order at endtime.com/screen. Go to endtime.com/screen or call 800-ENDTIME.
What if you could understand Bible prophecy? Dave Robbins, the host of the Endtime Show's TV and radio programs, is holding a free prophecy conference near you. Gain peace and understanding about what the Bible says concerning end-time prophecy. Call 1-800-ENDTIME or go to endtime.com/events to see when Dave will be in a location near you.
All right, everyone. So we got to figure out, how does this thing end up? And we're going to go to the Bible for that. So in 550 BC, the prophet Daniel received a vision of 4 beasts symbolizing 4 kingdoms or nations that would exist during the time of the second coming of Jesus Christ. In Daniel 7:4-7, these beasts and the modern nations they represent are a lion with eagle's wings, which is Great Britain and the United States. All of these are involved in this current conflict, by the way. Great Britain, the United States, a bear, Russia, a leopard with 4 heads, Germany, and a beast with 10 horns, including the revived Holy Roman Empire, which is the current European Union. Okay? So every beast in Daniel 7, symbolizing a modern nation, is involved in this current conflict. 650 years later, John in Revelation employs these same national symbols to depict the end-time global government. But unlike Daniel's vision of 4 distinct beasts, John describes them as a unified into a single worldwide authority, a world government. And the interpretation would go, and I stood upon the sand of the sea. This would be Revelation 13, 1 and 2. I stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw a single beast, rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Upon his horns, symbolizing the European Union, the 10 horns, were 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. The beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, Germany. So Germany is going to be involved. The entirety of the European Union is going to be involved. His feet was as the feet of the bear. Russia is going to be in alliance with Europe in the end time. He's not going to be aligned with China or North Korea or any of this other. When it's all said and done, Russia is going to be in alliance with the European Union. His mouth is the mouth of the lion. Great Britain's going to be there. And then, of course, the dragon or Satan gave it his power, seat, and great authority. So this prophecy, it is spanning 2,000 years, and it foretells the emergence of the end-time world government that is certainly being established right now. Number one, the bear Russia is going to be part of this European-centered world government in the end time. So, in this current conflict, Ukraine is not going to destroy Russia and wipe them off the map. Russia is not going to wipe Eastern Europe off the map in a nuclear war. It's not going to happen. Russia and all of them are going to be here. Gomer in Ezekiel chapter 38, Eastern Russia. Gog and Magog, Eastern Europe, Gog and Magog, Russia. They're all there to come down against Israel to battle at the Battle of Armageddon. So they're not going to wipe each other out with nuclear weapons in the near future. Perhaps Russia will send off one, but they're not going to wipe each other out, okay? Now, President Trump can't answer that. Zelensky can't answer that. Putin can't answer that, but we can answer it specifically, beyond a shadow of a doubt, from the prophecies of the Bible. Number 2, in Daniel 7, the eagle's wings represent the United States of America, and they're absent from the composite beast described in Revelation 13. So the omission here suggests that the United States will not participate in the final global governing body, and the prophecy implies a shift in global dominance from the United States of America to European powers. And, of course, that raises several questions and answers some of them. So a question would be, given our current role as the leading force in world government, how's the transition going to take place? Could the U.S. be devastated by a third world war? Certainly we will feel the effects of that. Could we be humbled and lose our influence internationally? Or could we retreat into some kind of an isolationism? Well, there is a key scripture that sheds some light on these uncertainties. And certainly, you can kind of see what's going on right now with the powers could shift. Could this be that we are disengaging from the European Union? They're saying that, hey, maybe we can't trust America like we thought we always could. Because, especially under the Trump administration, because if they don't, Trump is saying, hey, you guys need to pay your fair share. You guys need to be able to protect yourselves. I'm not completely disengaging from NATO and Europe, but you guys need to come up here and pull your weight. So in Revelation 12, the eagle's wings, they reappear, and it's the only other time in end-time Bible prophecy that mentions the eagle's wings, or the nation of. In verse 13 in Revelation 12, it says that a dragon is persecuting a woman adorned with 12 stars, representing Israel and the 12 tribes of Israel. And Revelation 13 identifies the dragon as, or Revelation 12 identifies the dragon, and in Revelation 13 says that it's working through the Antichrist and his global regime to carry out this persecution. And yet the following verse, Revelation 12:14, says that Israel will will find refuge during the Great Tribulation, the final 3.5 years before the second coming of Jesus Christ. It says, and to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, the United States, where she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for a time, times, and half a time from the face of the serpent. So here's my question here, because if you look at what's going on, Could we be witnessing the beginning of this separation of the United States from Europe and NATO? And it might just be the beginning and then be completed after World War III. I don't have the answer at this point. But for the United States under President Trump to say, you guys, if you don't stop, then we're going to pull out and let you and Russia go at it. That was a huge statement that I heard on Friday. And now all of Europe is looking at what he just said and saying, huh? You got to be kidding me. So yesterday they had that big conference, and they're supporting Zelensky, and they're saying, hey, we, the European Union, will put boots on the ground. We will put planes in the air. And saying, hey, we may not be able to rely on the United States, so we might have to go this thing alone. And the Bible says that there's going to be a separation, and the world governing powers are going to swing over to Europe. Now, one thing we do know, Russia will be in alliance with the European Union, and the United States will be out. Okay? And you remember President Trump saying, I'm not necessarily for Russia, I'm not necessarily for Ukraine, I'm for the world, I'm for the United States of America. He said, you guys, we're really not as invested in this as you are, Europe and Zelensky, because we've got an ocean between us. He keeps trying to say, hey, I'm America first. You guys, you can either get our help or we're out. Now, this is a situation, this is playing out in your news right now, everybody. But a careful reading of Revelation 12 and 13, it provides two certainties. The United States, symbolized by the eagle's wings, we're going to stand with and support Israel against the world government all the way to the end. Number two, the United States is going to remain separate from the global governing system, avoiding this subjection to the Antichrist rule. Very important, right? That's the position I want to be in the end time. So let me talk to you about Russia, the bear. And when we go to Daniel chapter 7, I want to focus pretty much for the remaining of our time on Daniel 7, verse 5, because it talks about the bear and it focuses in here. And I want you to kind of, contemplate something. Daniel 7:5 says, Daniel's going through the four beasts, and he says, and behold, another beast, a second, like to a bear, and it raised up itself on one side. Now, Daniel, God's showing, this is written in symbolism. The bear is Russia. So he's saying, this Russia, this modern-day nation of Russia, will rise up itself on one side, and it had three ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it, and they said thus unto it, arise and devour much flesh. And it had three ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it. So, think about that. A lot of people want to know what the three ribs are. We have speculated for years that the ribs could be one of the two different scenarios. And if you think about this, when you think about the nations involved here, the United States, Great Britain, Germany, and then the European Union, the bear, think about what's going on. The bear has raised itself up on one side. Russia has raised itself up on one side. This is what I'm talking about. Think about the three different scenarios is what I'm going to lay out here. Because I don't have the conclusive answer for this, but I want you to consider something with me. For years, we have speculated on two different scenarios. I'm going to give you a third today. Let's discuss the possible identity of these three ribs in the bear's mouth. And, first we have to determine who the nations are and when they exist. The bear here is the United States, or is the bear is Russia. We know the nations from Daniel 7 exist at the time of the second coming of Jesus Christ. Again, I'm focusing on verse 5. Behold, another beast, a second, like to a bear. We know it's Russia. And it raised up itself on one side, three ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it, and they said, thus arise and devour much flesh. So, we have speculated for years that the ribs could be one of two different scenarios. So, the possible identity of these three ribs. Notice that the bear raised up itself on one side. Russia has always moved in aggression against the nations on the one side of her. For 50 years after World War II, she controlled East Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, and Albania. Of course, it was because of Alger-Hiss she got a lot of that, right? You guys know, I won't go into that story, but you guys understand prophecy and how Russia had their negotiator on both sides of the table. That's how she got so much of Eastern Europe. The bear is always shown having 3 ribs in the mouth of it. I want to keep that in your right at the forefront of your mind here as I go through here. At this point, we can only speculate, but for years we thought that the 3 ribs could have been Manchuria, Mongolia, and Xinjiang, bones of contention. It was these 3 provinces which Russia took from China by means of 19th century treaties, since China feels that these treaties were imposed upon her unjustly. These 3 land areas have become bones of contention between Russia and China. They still are, folks. Many armed flare-ups have occurred in these areas, and it is now feared that these border disputes could someday ignite into an all-out war between the 2 giants. Now, it's way on the back burner. I get it. But you still have to consider these 3 ribs in the bear's mouth. However, if you notice what's been going on the world stage lately, obviously Russia and China seem to be kind of aligning. They're in BRICS and different things. They're aligning with each other for several reasons. So it doesn't appear at this time that there are any bones of contention between Russia and China, but we all know that things can change tomorrow, right? So we will have to watch how the alignment of these 2 countries develops over time. Maybe President Trump's views on a peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine is a way of pulling Russia away from China, which President Trump views as a much bigger threat than Russia. So you got to understand really what's going on here in the whole dynamics, the large scope. A lot of people get mesmerized on Trump and Zelensky. There's a lot more than that going on here, folks. And so I wanted to bring this up before you today. We're actually going to get deeper off into the woods on the back side of the break. So don't touch that dial. We're going to go into some more history.
The Roman government controlled the world. So many people were looking for a different Messiah, a rescuing Messiah. Remember the story of the woman at the well. The woman saith unto him, I know that Messiah cometh, which is called Christ. And Jesus said unto her, I that speak unto thee am he. Jesus very clearly stated that he was God and that he was the Messiah. We're even more blessed because we haven't seen those things, but yet we believe. When Jesus cried out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? He knew every one of these prophecies had to be fulfilled. He said, it is finished.
Now streaming on OneSource and available to order at endtime.com/revealed. Go to endtime.com/revealed or call 800-ENDTIME.
So I want to go across that point one more time because the commercial was kind of coming in here, but I want you to think maybe President Trump, the views on this peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine is maybe a way for him to pull Russia away from China and align her more with Russia, which he views as, China the much bigger threat than Russia. So again, there's a lot of things going on here. So the countries of Manchuria, Mongolia, Xinjiang, those 3 bones of contention. We considered that could be maybe the 3 ribs in a bear's mouth years ago. Also, the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. Certainly another scenario, and when you're trying to figure out what the ribs are in the mouth of the bear, or Russia, right? In 1914, the Literary Digest published an article titled Russo-German War Talk stated, it seems the bone of contention between Russia and Germany is the possession of the Baltic states. Bones of contention, ribs. In an article written in 1940 titled Baltic territory, and pan-Germanism. The following paragraph was found, and I'm quoting here. In case of war with Russia, it is evident that the great aim and object of Germany, in order to strengthen her position in the East, would be the conquest of the Baltic governments, which are right on the border of Russia. Battle of the airwaves, the Baltics complete with Russia for the hearts and minds. This is from Reuters. And responding to what they see as a wave of Kremlin propaganda over Ukraine, this is years ago, the governments of the 3 Baltic states are keeping a wary eye on Moscow Pro TV channels and stepping up their own broadcasts in Russian. Bones of contention between Russia and Europe. So remember, the Bible says that the bear had 3 ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it. Bones of contention. Manchuria, Mongolia, Xinjiang, and possibly the Baltic nations, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, all part of the Soviet Union all the way until 1991. And they're nervous of this, the assertive Russia, and fret that their large Russian-speaking minorities could be susceptible to Moscow's messages. Bones of contention here. Or possibly ribs. And occupied and annexed by Joseph Stalin in World War II, these Baltic states saw mass immigration by Russians in the Soviet period. Lithuania was the only one of the 3 to give its ethnic Russians automatic citizenship when the Baltics won back their independence, probably a generation ago. So in Latvia and Estonia, many ethnic Russians have what those countries call respective non-citizens or alien passports, which allows them to travel, but not to vote in national elections. And their status and rights have long been a bone of contention with Moscow. And then, of course, think about this with NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The post-Germany reuniting, all the way in 2004, the Baltic states joined NATO. They're right there on the border with Russia. That was in 2004. So it is possible that the Baltic states of Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia could be the 3 ribs in the mouth of the bear. Now, that's what we have thought for years, folks. But I want you to consider Ukraine. The Financial Express published an article, Ukraine, the bone of contention between Washington and Moscow. So I wanted to go through something here, if we have time. The Kennedy Beacon. It provided a short timeline of events. I want you to consider this with this bone of contention between Washington and Russia. And it'll kind of give you a little history on what's going on right now with the potential of, and what really led to Russia invading Ukraine. Because you're hearing all kinds of things in the news. But on February 1st, 2008, remember the promise from James Baker and all them way back in the 90s. You pull your troops out, allow the 2 Germanys to reunite after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the fall of the Soviet Union. Pull your troops out, and we won't move 1 inch eastward. Okay? That was the promise to Mikhail Gorbachev. Well, on February 1st, 2008, U.S. Ambassador to Russia, William Burns, sends a confidential cable to U.S. National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice entitled "Niet means niet," or "No means no" in Russia, in Russian. Russia's NATO enlargement are red lines, period. No more enlargement of Russia. This is 2008. Emphasizing that, listen at this, Ukraine and Georgia's NATO aspirations not only touch a raw nerve in Russia, but they engender serious concerns about the consequences for stability in the region. Russia back then was saying, stop. Ukraine is a red line. We will never allow you to come in and NATO to be part of, Ukraine to be part of NATO. Then on April 3rd, 2008, NATO declares that Ukraine and Georgia will become members of NATO. Think about this. They're poking the bear, aren't they? Russia declares that Georgia's and Ukraine's membership in alliance is a huge strategic mistake, which would have most serious consequences for pan-European security. Then on June 14th, 2021, now you remember Russia invaded in February of 2022. On June 14th, 2021, at the 2021 NATO summit in Brussels, NATO reconfirms NATO's intention to enlarge and include Ukraine. They said, and I'm quoting, "We reiterate the decision made at the 2008 Bucharest summit that Ukraine will become a member of the NATO alliance." September 1, 2021, the U.S. reiterates support for Ukraine. Now, this is under Joe Biden. Reiterates support for Ukraine's NATO aspirations in the joint statement on the U.S.-Ukraine strategic partnership. Joe Biden was just, they were just asking for it, weren't they? January 26th, 2022, the U.S. formally replies to Russia that the U.S. and NATO will not negotiate with Russia over issues of NATO enlargement, slamming the door on a negotiated path to avoid an expansion of the war in Ukraine. No negotiations. Trump is wanting to negotiate. Zelensky is saying, no, not going to work. Not going to happen. So what happens back here in 2021? Well, the United States under Joe Biden invokes NATO policy that any decision to invite a country to join the alliance is taken by the North Atlantic Council on the basis of consensus among allies. Listen to this. I'm still quoting. No third country has a say in such deliberations. So basically, the United States asserted that NATO enlargement to Ukraine is none of Russia's business. Okay? Even though in the early 90s, James Baker and many other people told Mikhail Gorbachev, pull your troops out, allow the Germans to reunite, and we'll never go 1 inch eastward. Now there's 16 more countries towards Russia that have become members of NATO. Well, of course, what happened after this statement? On February 21, 2022, at a meeting of the Russian Security Council, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, he's the same guy that met Rubio down in Saudi Arabia just a couple weeks ago. He was foreign minister back then. This was February, right before they invaded. He details the U.S. refusal to negotiate, and he says this. This is, again, Joe Biden's the president at this point. He says, we received their response in late January. And the assessment of this response shows that our Western colleagues are not prepared to take up any of our major proposals, primarily those on NATO's eastward non-expansion. In other words, Ukraine's a line in the sand, folks. Don't come there. You're not going to allow you to Ukraine to go into NATO. And this demand, Lavrov said, was rejected with reference to the bloc's so-called open door policy and the freedom of each state to choose its own way of ensuring security. Neither the United States nor the North Atlantic Alliance proposed an alternative to this key provision. So the United States is doing everything it can to avoid the principle of indivisibility of security that we consider a fundamental of fundamental importance, and to which we have made many references, deriving from it the only elements that suits them, the freedom to choose alliances, and they completely ignore everything else, including the key condition that reads that nobody, either in choosing alliances or regardless of them, is allowed to enhance their security at the expense and the security of others. Okay, so what does this lead to? Well, we got a huge problem, don't we? In February 24th, 2022, in an address to the nation, President Putin of Russia, he declares, it is a fact that over the last 30 years, we have been patiently trying to come to an agreement with the leading NATO countries regarding the principles of equal and indivisible security in Europe. In response to our proposals, we invariably faced either cynical deception or lies or attempts at pressure and blackmail. While the North Atlantic Alliance continued to expand despite our protests and concerns, its military machine is moving and, as I said, is approaching our very border. Folks, that same day, Russia invaded Ukraine. Now, again, I don't agree with everything Russia has done. I don't agree with everything Ukraine has done, but that's the facts. Now, what I want you to consider today is the three ribs in the bear's mouth. The Bible says the bear, Russia, will raise up on one side. Manchuria, Mongolia, Xinjiang, the Baltic nations, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and now Ukraine and the situation going on there. Is it possible that all three of them, the situations between them and China, the Baltic nations, and then Ukraine, could those three be the three ribs, the bones of contention in the Russian bear's mouth? At this point, I cannot give you a conclusive answer, but I speculate that it might be. Again, I'm speculating here. It's totally my opinion. I think it's something that we will have to live through, and then look back and say, okay, this is what it was. At this point, I don't have the answer, but I'm telling you, look at what's going on here. And we are probably watching prophecy play out right before our very eyes. Certainly with Russia, the European Union, the United States, the eagle, the 10-horned beast, and the Russian bear. And folks, those three entities were mentioned in Daniel chapter 7, 2,500 years ago, and then again 2,000 years ago when John wrote the book of Revelation, exiled out on the Isle of Patmos. And these events are supposed to be happening just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ. Folks, we're only a few years away from that. And we're staring it right in the face. We're living in the end time. What should we be doing? We should be having revival like there's no tomorrow. And we got to be reaching people. People need to be getting part of good Bible-believing, Bible-teaching churches, because if you watch what's going on, just don't focus on the Zelensky, President Trump situation and what happened last Friday. Look at the entire scope of the situation. Read the prophecies of the Bible, understand them, and it'll show you how close we are to the second coming of Jesus Christ. It's right around the corner. I've got to get myself ready. I got to get my friends, family, my sphere of influence ready, and everybody that listens to us. I want your feet to leave the ground when that trumpet sounds. God bless. Folks, we're all in the end time right now.